Have we made some bad deals in the past?
We've made some terrible deals in the past. So the guy who wrote the email for the Chamber of Commerce, my question was simply this: did you even read the bill?
Welcome to Policy, Not Politics. I'm your host, Ralph Bristol, and my guest today is Senator Kerry Roberts, the chairman of the state Senate Government Operations Committee. And you are sponsoring the bill that would enact more transparency in the tax breaks that we give large businesses to move to Tennessee, Nashville, and other places.
That's right, yeah.
Tell us about how you would make it more transparent.
Well, there are two parts of the bill. I mean, the bill is really about the transparency in the grants that we give, and then also the tax credits. And so in the fast-track grant programs, we don't always require by law that people do what they say they're supposed to do. Now, contractually, it might be written into the contract between the state of Tennessee and, the company, but by statute, it's not in there. So I liken it to imagine a jigsaw puzzle on the table. It's got 100 pieces, and maybe 2/3 of those pieces are in place. Mm-hmm. What the bill does is it snaps the other third of those pieces in place so that we require by law that these companies do what they say they would do, and more important, or just as important, that they report what they do. That's been a big problem for ECD, Department of Economic and Community Development, ECD. It's been a real problem for them to chase this information from the companies to see if the companies were doing what they said they would do. So we put it in statute that they have to do it. Then there's the issue of the jobs tax credit. So the jobs tax credit is, we have about $1 billion of unused tax credit in Tennessee. And it's not an exaggeration to say there's literally only one man behind the curtain in Tennessee that knows who those tax credits go to, and that's the Commissioner of the Department of Revenue. So if you were to do...
So that would have to be disclosed now.
Exactly,
When would it have to be disclosed?
Well, it would be disclosed at the point that the credits are granted, so we know who can take advantage of them. But in some states, you can go online and see this information. So we're not putting Tennessee, it's really important, we're not putting Tennessee at a competitive disadvantage.
Which is one of the criticisms from the Chamber of Commerce.
The guy who wrote the email for the Chamber of Commerce, my question was simply this: did you even read the bill? Because the email said, all of this process is going to be disclosed, and that's not true. The only thing that gets disclosed in this negotiation process is after the contract is signed. Now, there are people who don't like that. There are people who say we ought to have disclosure transparency during the entire negotiation process.
What do you think about that?
Well, it's a valid argument, but that's not what this bill does, and that's an argument for another time. This bill picks up once the contract is signed. What happens from then on? So you negotiate in secret, and that's the way it is. You negotiate with non-disclosure agreements in place. That's the way it is. And whether that's right or wrong, that's not what this bill is about. Proprietary information, that's not what this bill is about. So you sign the agreement, you sign the contract, and Company X says, we're going to hire 1,000 people if you give us all this stuff. And so what the bill does, it says that 1,000 people has to be disclosed, and it has to be reported by the company. And, oh, by the way, the Department of Labor and Workforce Development, they've got to talk to ECD, and they've got to confirm that these jobs were hired.
But they don't have to talk to the legislature in advance. Does it bother you at all that the administration can make these deals and give us larger tax credits as they want to without you guys knowing about it or having any approval?
And yes, it does. And here's the thing. For the purpose of this bill, I've not spent a lot of time talking about it, and here's why. Because the critics, the people who think it's their God-given right to take taxpayer dollars and give it to a corporation, right? There are people in this. We've spawned.
Are there any limits on how much?
What's based in the public treasury, right? But see, here's the problem that we have. The problem that we have is it's not a constitutional right that I can take your tax dollars and give it to Corporation ABC. It is a right that's granted by the Tennessee General Assembly, which means it can be taken away by the Tennessee General Assembly. But the problem is we've created this whole cottage industry of economic and community development. You know, we have about 100 industrial development boards across the state. Generally, they're counties, some are
Right.
cities. They can give out what are called TIFs or pilots or these other things, and they don't have to come back and ask permission from the Tennessee General Assembly. We gave them a right to do that. Well, we could take that right away. But I tell you, we've got the inmates in charge of the asylum. In the moment that they feel like any of that is threatened, they pitch a royal fit. But it is under the purview of the Tennessee General Assembly. We can do it if we want.
Have we made some bad deals in the past?
We've made some
because of
terrible deals
non-disclosure?
in the past. We made some terrible deals. And it's not, I wouldn't necessarily say it's because of non-disclosure. I would say it's because somebody made a bad deal. The problem is because there isn't transparency in the process, we can't go back and measure the successful ones, and we can't measure the bad ones. So in the aggregate, we don't know if Tennessee is won or lost. Now, the people who are advocates for this, they say, well, of course Tennessee's won. Look at Volkswagen, or look at, Saturn, or look at, and they start, they name all these things. But the problem is, that's not an accurate measure. Those are you're picking your winners in isolation, and you're not tallying in the losers.
Is there any effort to try to project in advance how much this new company coming into Tennessee, let's say Amazon to Nashville, is going to cost the city of Nashville or the state of Tennessee?
Well, it depends
in
on who
terms
does it.
of
Yeah.
new necessary services because of the new population and whatnot?
Right. It depends on who does it. So, for example, from a state standpoint, we're really talking about, jobs tax credit. That's a big thing that we give in these grants that we give. But then when you get to the county level or the Nashville level, Nashville's got its own industrial development board, and they start granting all of these tax breaks, the TIFs, the pilots, all these other acronym soup things that they can do. These are tools in their toolbox. Well, they may execute those tools very well. They may not. The problem is that they have the authority to do that, and they may cut a good deal or they may cut a bad deal, and that gets in. But that again, that's not what this legislation is about.
Right.
That's a whole separate issue that somebody can make an argument that we ought to take a look at.
Because my concern and some others' concern is that when we give these big tax breaks to corporations and they come in and they create the demand for more services that are expensive, school, transportation, et cetera.
In the aggregate,
and if they don't pay their fair share for the services that they're creating the demand for, then Nashville comes in and raises our taxes to cover.
Let me ask you a question.
That.
So Amazon, 5,000 jobs, going to pay $150,000 each, right? So they say.
That's what they say.
Okay, that's what they say. What happens if it's not 5,000 jobs? What happens if they don't pay $150,000 each?
Mm-hmm. I don't know.
What is the city of Nashville going to do?
I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I don't know what's Nashville negotiated with them, right?
Well, Tennessee's giving $100 million.
Yeah, from a state standpoint, that contract ought to be built with a clawback in it that says if you don't perform and do what you say you're going to do, then we get the money back. Now, the problem is that's a point of negotiation. If we put it in statute, it's not a point of negotiation. You do it or you don't. And it ought to be a red flag if a company says, well, I'm not going to agree to that. Then don't promise to hire 5,000 people. What do you think is a safe number?
Right.
Promise to hire 2,500 people.
Right.
Don't promise to pay $150,000. Promise, only do what you're going to do. Because what they do is they overpromise, they underdeliver, and who's on the hook? The taxpayer.
If this passes,
yes,
is there a second step? Well, first of all, what's your feeling? What do you think the chances are?
Okay,
of
now
this
let's go
passing?
back to this bill because again, this bill, what we've done is we've talked about a big topic here, and this bill is only a small subset of this big topic. And this bill is about what happens after you ink the deal from a state standpoint, not from a city or county industrial development board standpoint. So from a state standpoint, what this would mean is on the fast track grants, we've got disclosure and accountability. We know what they said they would do. We know how to measure it
after the deal was announced.
And if they don't do it, we're going to get a clawback on it. And then on the jobs tax credit, that's going to be disclosed too. So we can look at kind of the Tennessee balance sheet at any given time. We can see, right now we've got $1 billion plus in unused credits, so we know exactly who they're to, when they might take them, and how that's going to impact the Tennessee state.
So all of these things
budget.
are measurable.
And that's what this bill is about. So this bill is a small subset, and to answer your question, this bill is very congruent with what Governor Lee said on the campaign trail.
Mm-hmm.
It's very congruent with what he said at Memphis when they were
Because
announcing
he hasn't
FedEx.
signed on to this bill yet.
Not yet, but again, that's because the bill originated by a consortium of interest groups, limited government interest groups, public information interest groups, the media. If there was ever a bill that proved the old adage that politics makes for strange bedfellows,
Mm-hmm.
we've got liberal groups, we've got conservative groups, we've got open records groups, we got a bunch of people that worked together on this bill, and what they did that was kind of neat was they said, what can we do that's realistic? What can we do that will hold our consortium together? What can we do that we can all agree on is a good idea? And this bill was a product of that. And they were also asking, and what could we do that we think we could get the support of the governor and the support of the Commissioner of Economic and Community Development? And believe it or not, I think we'll have it.
Do you know how many other states have this kind of disclosure?
I'm going to give you, it's hard to compare state to state because they're all nuanced, but basically we've got 28, I believe is the number, and it could be, Ralph, it could be 22. I don't recall. I've got both numbers floating in my head, but we've either got 22 or 28 states that already disclose this job tax credit type information. See, it might be a little bit different in another state how they do it, but they disclose this stuff. In some of those states, I believe the number is 28, some of those states are doing better from an economic and community development standpoint than Tennessee is. So we don't believe that disclosure hurts the economic development process at all.
If this passes,
Yes.
and you create this disclosure, will
Mm-hmm.
it all be published on the state website? How will people be able to?
It will be
Look up
it'll be a
the
searchable,
report card, so to speak?
So right now we do have a lot of disclosure in Tennessee. Right now, for example, on the grant side of things, you can look it up and see who were given the grants. Okay, so we've got a lot of disclosure there. Where we're lacking on the disclosure is on the job tax credit. That's where we're lacking disclosure. So if you want to see who has grants, who received these fast track grants, you can go look that up pretty easily. It's the job tax credit that you can't look up, and that I can't look up, and that you can't look up. A Freedom of Information Act won't get you that information.
Have you had a meeting, hearing on this bill yet?
No, no. So
have you talked with the people who do make these negotiations with
Yes.
companies to
Right.
see what they think?
So here's what we've done so far. So in terms of the preparation of the bill, we had a wide group of people that have both worked in Tennessee and in other states. We also had people who are involved in economic and community development, involved in the drafting of it. And then when the bill came to me a few weeks ago, I filed the bill, and then I called the Commissioner of Economic and Community Development, and I said, this bill, in my opinion, is very consistent with what Governor Lee said on the campaign trail, but I just want you to hear it from me. We're not trying to do something to ECD. We're trying to do something with ECD, because keep in mind, a lot of what's in this bill, except for the job tax credit disclosure, but a lot of what's in this bill is something that things that ECD were already doing as items in their items in their contract, but it gives it more teeth if it's in statute. And that's what we were trying to do, is we're trying to put this in Tennessee's code so that when you're negotiating with a company, you're saying, hey, you're going to have to tell us this stuff. Mm-hmm. And this isn't optional. This is in Tennessee code. By law, you're going to have to do it. And by law, Tennessee Department of Labor and Workforce Development is going to have to tell, Department of Economic and Community Development, did company X do what they say they would do as far as the number of people they hired?
Will there be a fiscal note on this?
Haven't seen one yet.
Do you expect one?
There ought not to be one. There could be, but there ought not to be one, because all the information is available from Labor and Workforce Development, and there ought not to be a cost to make that available. Right now, what Labor and Workforce Development says is that door is locked and you're not allowed to get into it by law. And we're saying by law we're gonna make that so that door is open. Now the rest of it is really about company reporting, so the cost of that's going to be on them. You could have cost on the ECD side of who's going to tabulate those reports, but those reports are supposed to be doing be done already.
Maybe that's why the
Yeah.
Chamber of Commerce says, well, this will put us at a competitive disadvantage because it will be
I-
more
no, no,
costly for these companies to come in and do this.
Wholeheartedly, I believe the issue with Tennessee Chamber is that they looked at who was involved in the bill, they drew conclusions, and they didn't read the bill. That's what I believe. Now, they may say something entirely different, but that's exactly what I believe, because I cannot match up that email with this piece of legislation. When I read that email, I thought, my goodness, they've read a different piece of legislation, because that's not my bill.
Will it be your committee that hold the first hearings on this, or somebody else?
That's a really good question. I don't know where it's going to be assigned yet. It could go to government operations, but I think it would go to commerce. Our committee system on the
Paul Bailey,
Senate
isn't it?
side, yes. On the Senate side, it kind of looks at what section of code we're opening. And in this particular case, this opens several sections of code, so I don't know how ultimately it would be assigned. But it would be assigned in several places. By the way, on this email from the Chamber, it's like here where it talks about the release of proprietary project information. That's just not true.
Yeah.
Making all information about economic development projects open, that's just not true. And, drawing a line in the sand, no. Or that we've vowed to fight, no. We're working. This is the stuff that Governor Lee talked about on the campaign trail. We're not in a fight with Governor Lee. We're coming to him and saying, hey, all that stuff you talked about on the campaign trail? We got a great bill that does exactly what you said you wanted to do on the campaign trail. Now, that was
But
a
you
campaign.
haven't
This
had a
is now.
discussion with Governor
I've got a
Lee's
discussion.
office.
No, I have a meeting with him upcoming. I've already met with the commissioner, and it was a great meeting with the commissioner. And commissioner he's a great guy. He really is a great guy. I mean, he's working hard for Tennessee. And so his response to it was, hey, I'll look forward to hearing, about your meeting with the governor and seeing how that goes. And obviously he's going to defer to what Governor Lee says, but I've had a hallway conversation with Governor Lee, and this is what he said. And this is so true. He said, you know what, there's no reason that we can't lead in both economic and community development and in accountability and transparency. They're not mutually exclusive. And I said, thank you, Lord, that's exactly what I've been saying. That's literally what he said, was literally verbatim what I've been saying to people. We can do both. They're not mutually exclusive.
All right. Handicap the chances.
I feel really good about it. Now, I probably just jinxed myself by saying that, because on the Senate side, we don't have all the subcommittee stuff, and you've reported on subcommittee shenanigans in the past on your show, and you know very well how that works. But on the Senate side, it's going to go to the committee. If it has a fiscal note, it'll go to finance. But I think I think most senators, when I've sat down and had a conversation with them, that this is after the fact. Doesn't involve negotiation, doesn't involve proprietary information. They go, oh yeah, well that I thought we were doing that already. That tends to be the response.
Okay. Senator Kerry
We'll
Roberts.
see.
Thank you.
We'll see. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Policy, Not Politics, a podcast dedicated to the discussion of the pros and cons of public policy with leaders we elect to make policy for the people of Tennessee. I'm Ralph Bristol. Thanks for listening and for inviting your friends to listen likewise. Just click the share button on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube and watch for the next edition, or listen for the next edition of Policy, Not Politics.